Hello, everyone, and welcome to ANI Office Hours. This is Jim Mesnati, Senior Functional Consultant for ANI. We provide these office hours every 2 weeks, as many of our attendees know. We focus usually on either a particular tool, Sakai, or a particular practice or aspect of using Sakai. Today's topic is accessibility in Sakai. We've got Matt Clare from Brock University, who also heads the Sakai Accessibility Working Group. So he is going to talk about various aspects of Sakai accessibility that you should see coming in Sakai 11, along the same lines for what you can expect in Sakai 11 for improved accessibility. We also have on hand as some guest speakers Jeff Pash and Kyle Blythe, both from New York University and from the Gradebook redesign project. So before we kind of delve any deeper, I will first just say a bit more about the guest speakers that we have. Matt Clare, as I said, from Brock University, and he's the manager of their e-learning Center for Pedagogical Innovation, and also a part-time instructor. And then Jeff and Kyle from New York University, they're part of the Sakai team there at NYU. Jeff is the LMS product director, and Kyle is the product analyst. And they've, this is for those of you who may or may not know, there's been a ongoing project since last spring to do a redesign of the gradebook. So they've been working closely with some usability and accessibility experts and designers and developers and faculty in creating this next generation gradebook. So today they're focusing on how accessibility has been, for the most part, how accessibility has been considered in the new gradebook design.
Thank you very much for the introduction. I really appreciate it. I will just highlight at the bottom there's a link for an accessible version of this presentation. It's in PowerPoint format. Unfortunately, Google presentation isn't the most accessible tool there is. Not to say PowerPoint is, but it is at least one that's more accessible and familiar. So I want to talk about the Accessibility Working Group and what our role is. It's a role that's been in the Sakai community for a very long time. It's a role that's grown and shrunk and gone from different hands, and I find it right now in mine, and have for about 2 years now. And what we try and do is accessibility consulting to the Sakai community. We've historically performed accessibility reviews, and we still do that on an instant kind of basis. Identify and set standards to meet, which is at the moment WCAG 2 level AA. I'll talk about that. And track accessibility issues, which turns into writing JIRAs, which are the Sakai development's issue tracking system. And we gobble up, really enjoy any accessibility report in any form. And one role that we think that we can fit into the community really well in is taking reports of accessibility issues in any form and turning those into JIRAs, which can then move through development. Or maybe it's an issue that doesn't need a solution, it's a duplicate of something else, etc. In that scenario I mentioned in particular, we're still happy to have the information. So that's one thing that we continue to do and really value. And we work to resolve issues. Some of our community can actually work on the code, myself not being one of them. And we've written some accessibility documentation as well. And there's a little icon of barriers being removed. So Jim struggled over the rally plan. I'll talk about that in a second. In that hashtag world, accessibility has turned into the hashtag of A11Y. And that's occasionally called ALLY because it sure does look a lot like ALLY. I've been to conferences called ALLY camps and other similar things like that. So A11Y is the accessibility hashtag. You can see in the animation there, it's just replacing 11 letters in the word accessibility. And in the Sakai community right now, we're working on our rally plan. So I apologize for these cheesy graphics. I am the author. But the rally plan is our plan to review accessibility, and thought it'd be helpful to have a catchy name, and that's what it is. So when we talk about the rally plan, I'll talk more about the practicalities of accessibility in Sakai. So our rally plan, there's a 3-phase table here of what we're trying to do to review the accessibility in Sakai. The first 2 phases are going to be moved in and out of at different points. And the last phase is a comprehensive review of Sakai itself. So our first phase, identify and prioritize what needs to be reviewed in Sakai. We have some legacy reviews for Sakai, which have stood Sakai in very good stead as far as accessibility. But we've also got things that are evolving in Sakai and things need more scrutiny. So we need to identify what we know about the accessibility of Sakai. We've been lucky to get 2 audits that have been made public of Sakai. One was made at the behest of Brock University, a partial audit, and one was made by Longsight and made public, and again a partial audit. And those 2 audits actually looked at the same thing a lot. But they are valuable in that they identify a bunch of issues, some that are already being worked on, and they contribute to our knowledge of Sakai's accessibility. We do need to look at the rest of Sakai. So one of our first phases there is to fundraise to commission more audits and to get more partial audits of the parts that we haven't audited yet. And we also want to be strategic about that. And some people may know that a tool like the Wiki tool may be replaced. At the very least, its code will likely be replaced. It's code that's pretty old. Is that something that we want to look at first? Probably not, and then further. So when do we start to look at it? Those are the kinds of decisions we're trying to make in our small group, and we're doing that on our mailing list. And we meet every other Thursday at 2 o'clock Eastern. So as we identify these issues, we need to fix them. Looking for assistance from the community there, and I've been lucky so far. And then once all the components of Sakai have been through this review, fix and enhance, review, fix and enhance, then ultimately we'd like to go for a comprehensive review of Sakai. There's a standard under the American Accessibility Act called a VPAT, a Voluntary Product Accessibility Template. Sorry, I'm speaking to you from north of that border. And it's a lower bar than the other standard WCAG 2, but it's something we can do ourselves and prepare ourselves for asking a tier 1 kind of organization that does accessibility testing and certification to review Sakai and give us certification. And that is something that's nice to have for all the people that use Sakai and through all kinds of different means. That's something that's good to have from a competitive perspective, so that when people who'd like to adopt Sakai, propose Sakai, have to meet important accessibility standards at various institutions, then it can be proven and verified that Sakai can meet that standard. And that by the same token, those institutions already using Sakai would like to know their status for all kinds of reasons as well. So that's the rally plan. We're fundraising. We've had some success. We're right now talking to organizations about who could perform those partial audits and setting timelines for there. And we're also talking about development. But I want to talk next about the ways anyone adding content to Sakai could make it more accessible, things to consider. But I'll pause there if there's some rally plan kinds of questions.
We did have one question, which is probably a good question, a little more broad than that, and it is, what exactly is an accessibility audit?
Sure, so that is an audit, as I scroll through my slides unintentionally. That is an audit done by likely first pass by a machine and second pass by a human to determine the functional components of a web page, Sakai, and do they meet specifications in something like WCAG2, which I'll outline in a bit. So does the system use that item that everyone's aware of, alternative tags for images, are they present or not? So that's a really simple thing that can be audited, and you get a nice report identifying where those alt tags may not be there. And then you can add them and move on. That's a really simple one. There's the big thing about WCAG2 is it talks a lot about an individual person making a meaning of something. And in that area, it often helps to have an authentic user, or at least someone skilled in the practice of reviewing, to determine if the right meaning is being made. So does the structure of that page have the right headings and lists and items? Does the information on the page, when it's read through an assistive technology, convey everything that's there? And moreover, is there some parts that are redundant and cause a cacophony of descriptions when it's read with the screen reader? And additionally, we've had scenarios where the interface may meet all those standards for alternate information, but the cognitive load is just so complicated. An example would be the matching question type in Sakai tests and quizzes. The way that reads out an assisted device is, here's your option, here's all your potential pairs, over and over and over and over again for every single option. So exponentially, the amount of alternative text read per option grows. That's something that really is valuable to get someone skilled in the area or an authentic tester to give us feedback on. And then we get that feedback and make changes.
Thanks, Matt.
So hopefully that answers the question.
I think so. I think we can. That was the only question so far, so I think we can move on.
All right.
Thanks.
Great. Sounds good to me. And if it brings any other questions forward, we can circle back.
Sure.
So I do want to outline that even though we are looking to get this rally plan underway and do some more auditing and viewing and fixing, Sakai does do a pretty good job today. The functional accessibility of some of the complex tools, like forms and others, do adhere to standards. It's more of those making meaning and cognitive load kinds of issues we're trying to look at. We want to help users input content in more accessible ways, because it's one thing for Sakai itself to be accessible, but then it needs to be accessible and people use it to add content, and that's what we're going to talk about today. There's some interesting stuff with the Morpheus project that we'll have a little bit of time to talk about, and other items as well. So I promised I'd talk about WCAG2. The WCAG is the current accessibility spec proposed by the W3C, the World Wide Web Consortium. It's a standard that's more restricted than the American Disabilities Act 508. It applies more than just HTML. And one of the nice things with WCAG is it is a standard that's been adopted by legislation in a number of locations. So I'm speaking to you from Ontario, Canada, and in our province, all of our government and higher education institutions have to meet certain levels of the WCAG, Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, and that's written into legislation. That also goes for Illinois, I believe. California have that in their legislation. Same with Australia, and to an extent that I'm not aware of, but an extent in the UK as well. So WCAG is an agreed upon standard. W3C's been working through it through their process, and beyond that, it's nice that it's been adopted by legislation so that everyone who's working on the web can have basically one standard to agree upon going forwards. A important principle in the WCAG and just web accessibility generally is the POUR principle. Important principle is the POUR principle. POUR stands for perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust. And these are designed to ensure that people using assistive technologies can perceive and operate, understand your web page, your content, and the robustness is also important there. But it's not just individuals using accessible technology. This principle, if you had a web app like Sakai that was designed to this principle, when mobile became a big thing, you were much better off to adapt to mobile than you were otherwise. If you were designing a website based on the core principle when over a decade ago SEO became so important, you were already well situated for SEO. So having things that are perceivable in a number of ways means that a number of technologies and a number of end users can operate with it, can perceive it, pardon me. Same with being operational. If the user interface components and navigation structure are very operational, very well described, have important, meaningful relationships to each other, things like the heading tags on the page, using lists and those structural semantic elements, that makes your web page useful in all kinds of formats. Related, understandable information and the operation of the user interface must be understandable, structural elements clear and used in a meaningful way, related, and but more applied. And then robustness, of course. When we think of robustness, there's lots of technologies that anyone can think of that didn't turn out to be robust. And if you can think of a example of a PDF document that's been scanned and has columns in it, and those columns can't be read through left to right and not down the columns, that's not terribly robust. That's a really simple example. So if you can make things robust to be displayed in these different scenarios, to hold up to these different applications, uses, pardon me, then that's the best way you can make content if you do these four things. But the thing about the core principle is there's not necessarily a piece of technology that can just determine that you followed the core principle. It is something that's best evaluated by a human and something that has to be considered more than just turned on and off. So I always, when I say something that, there's no switch to turn on and off, I don't want to leave people feeling that this is something that's difficult to do. And I do like to share this table of levels of accessibility. It's not a perfect guide. It doesn't cover all scenarios, but I think it helps people consider and make decisions in the moment when they create content for something like Sakai. So on the left, unacceptable things. Things like scans of images with no alternative or descriptive text are, everyone knows, an issue and something to consider. But moreover, if you have a news article or a journal article about, let's say, elephants, and you have a picture of an elephant, if the article about the elephant is scanned as a picture, the assistive technology, or any other technology really, won't know the difference between a picture of an elephant and a picture of an article in an elephant, about elephants, and you want someone using assistive technology to be able to read that article, and if it's a picture, then they won't be able to read it. So in that case, alternative text would be one solution to that picture of an article, but there's better ways to do that. So that's, I think, an area where people can intuitively determine that's not acceptable. We don't want to have pictures of text. And when we do use pictures of text, we try to minimize it and provide alternative formats. But if we could use things like documents, electronic documents versus physical ones turned into electronic, then that is an improvement. We can likely have a screen reader or other assistive technology, something that might help someone understand and define terminology inside of a document, can go through that and perceive that there's text there. So Excel, OpenOffice, those documents would be better than a picture of a document. But in those scenarios, we do have to consider that the changing of context into a off of a web page into another application could be a major issue for someone with less ability to perceive what's happening on their computer. Then we get into that good column there. So something like a PDF document that's properly created. PDF documents tend to display in line. They tend to provide a lot of um, robust information in that they've got the text as a actual inspectable text that can be read by a screen reader, copy and pasted is a simple way to check to see if that's going to work. So they're better, and the nice thing about PDF is you can make a PDF in almost any scenario. So it's a nice, not quite a panacea, but it's a nice thing to know that when given the option, PDF is probably the best one to choose. And then the best option is to create content on the web that's for the web, because we know the web can be so robust, can give us those big wins for accessibility. So if you can write in the CK editor, the editor that comes with Sakai, or copy and paste into it, then that's going to be your best option for someone using assistive technologies, and in many other situations, it'll load faster, to make the accessible content and to know that that content is robust. And if you think about how that applies to something like a mobile document, everything on the left here, including PDF or good practices, would be sort of difficult on a smaller screen. The zooming would be challenging. The left-to-right reading on PDF would be challenging. But HTML, because it's very dynamic, it's very robust, it can be zoomed and reflowed and all that. So HTML is really the best practice you can choose, and then you can do even better inside of there. That's, I think, hopefully a simple guide. Sakai COE focuses on having a good application that allows for people with assistive devices to get around. The navigation, things like alternative keys are there, descriptions of form items and other items exist inside the portal, is what it's technically called, but the interface that's shared amongst all of Sakai. And just if you don't know what an alt key is, these are hotkeys to jump to content, jump to certain areas like navigation inside Sakai. So if you press, depending on the web browser you're using, in Firefox on the PC, for example, Alt-C will jump the focus of your web browser right into the main content area. There's 6 will take you to the help, and L will take you to the menu on the left. So if you were using any kind of interface, especially where you had to go through the web page linearly, so something like a screen reader or an alternative human input device that you may have to do something like tabbing through the entire page, that can get tedious and repetitive and unnecessary. Having alt keys lets someone simply jump right back to that main content every time they need to, and not have to hear the redundant interface over and over again or move through it over and over again. So I have an example of what Sakai is like through a screen reader, and it's just a short 1-minute video that's public on YouTube. And this is recorded with a plugin for Chrome called Chromebox, a free screen reader that anyone can have. And it simply is a recording of me using the tab key and other interfaces to make an account in Sakai, just so you can get a sense of how that might work. I'm going to try and play this for you, and hopefully you can hear the audio through my microphone. So heads up for a challenging demo, possibly.
Help message of the day opens in content. Tools, feed, acknowledge, new account, asterisk, first, last name, edit, first, T, last, email, asterisk, create account, Sakai/run, welcome, alert. This very brief tutorial presents basic information about the features and layout of Sakai. It will run once when you first log into Sakai. You click to dismiss. Tutorial. Alert. Tutorial. You can go back to this tutorial by clicking the tutorial link in this drop-down. Tutorial. Click to dismiss. Button. Click to dismiss. Button. Content info list. Jump to tools list. Jump to site list. Log out. Link.
Okay.
Tools list begins here.
So you can see in that example some of the interface items in there, like the dismissing the various alerts that popped up have an X, but the alternative text is in there to describe what that image is to represent. You got to see briefly some of the hotkeys so that you jump to content, and you got to see that those actual form items have labels, and those were read off as my keyboard took focus of those form items. Go ahead, Jim.
I was going to say we've got a few questions if you want to. If you want.
Sure, now's a good time.
Do those. Well, you have to take a quick break. Okay, so this one is a kind of small question, but it might be a good one to clear up. We did have someone say, "Am I the only one who pronounces WCAG as WCAG?" So is that something? How does that usually get pronounced?
I hear WCAG a lot. I say WCAG because I think that saying WCAG is a bigger barrier for people to understand what you're talking about, but lots of people say WCAG.
Very good. Cleared that up. Here's another. This is a great question. I thought. How do Google Docs fall into the poor, good, excellent, table for accessible content?
So Google Docs have probably in the good, but not in the best at all, because they have the advantage of being on the web and being native to the web, which is great. But unfortunately, there's no dialogue for adding alt information in this year's version of Google Presentation. So that's a challenge. And there's no dialogue for putting in table summaries or highlighting what the header row of a table is. That is in Office's suite, and that is in the Office 365 web version as well, not just the desktop. Those features make those preferable tools. Having said that, you can tell I'm using Google Presentation, so I don't think it's a huge distinguisher, but those, at least those items would identify areas where it's not accessible. I do know that there's a guide set up by the Accessibility Labs at, who I'm forgetting their full name, at OCAD University, that have given guides for creating accessible documents in the major Office suites. Unfortunately, their Google Apps document is from 2013, and so of course it's way out of date. But I do know others in the accessibility community have flagged that with Google Presentation and others, and in preparation for this, I can confirm that those features to describe structural elements and alternatives for images aren't there.
And we have another question here that, and this, the person said they already got the answer, but probably good just to bring up, just to clarify that what we just saw was a Chromevox is a plug-in screen reader, right? That we just saw in action.
Yes.
The text reader. And I don't know if you want to mention, are there other, like, what are the main, what are the main screen readers or screen reading technology that's out there right now? I don't know if you want to just mention some of those.
Sure. I've got a slide later on for some tools that you can check out.
Oh, okay.
And if the links to this Google presentation don't emerge naturally, someone can contact me for them. But JAWS is the #1 piece of desktop software for screen reading across all of Windows. It's an expensive suite of software, but it's the #1, and in a little ways, like mobile Safari is the only mobile web browser that counts when you're testing, which I'm saying to be hyperbolic. JAWS is kind of the same way. If things don't work with JAWS, they don't work, regardless of the other alternatives. But it's expensive software. So I like to recommend Google's Chromevox because it's free. It can be added to Chrome on all 3 desktop platforms, and it's not that definitive JAWS, but it's nonetheless a useful experience. There's also the NVA screen reader, which is an open source screen reader, so not just the web, but everything on Windows. But that's, again, Windows. And then the Mac has VoiceOver built into every copy of OS X in the last decade or so, and VoiceOver is pretty good as well. Again, not the definitive tester. But I come back to, I think Chromevox is nice because we're all here talking about web experience, and it's focused on that, and it's otherwise relatively simple and free to set up.
Thank you. Also somebody pointed out that there's a free trial version of JAWS too, so I think some folks have used that to test as well. Yeah.
That's another good point. I'm not maligning JAWS by any means, and people that rely upon it value it and what it does, and have a long-term relationship. For some people who are authentically using JAWS to navigate a computer, they have a long-term relationship with that tool.
Great.
Okay.
That's it. That's it for questions.
All right. So I wanted to talk about some things to consider when creating content in Sakai, and that's within the CK editor, the default editor in the last 2 to 3 versions of Sakai from various perspectives. It's much more accessible. It's a project that Sakai adopts from the broader community, and other web platforms like Drupal also use it, and we benefit from that broader community's work on it, and it's more accessible than its predecessor, the FCK editor. So that's the CK editor is what Sakai uses. And our Accessibility Working Group contributed some documentation for how to best create content I'm about to run through in the CK editor, which is in the Sakai 10 documentation, and there's links to the public copy of that. That's the ongoing version that's released with Sakai Help, hasn't changed at all. So that's a useful resource, and part of our goals from moving from a accessible, we think, platform to helping people put accessible content in it as well. So I've said much about alt tags. Everyone knows it's important to add an alternative text description to things like images, but some guidelines for that is alt tags are good for things with simple meaning, but there's also the option for a long description for more complex ones, or more rich meanings. You can add a paragraph. That's what the long description is designed for. A simple meaning is for the alt tag. Creating an alt tag is quite the text for an alt tag is quite the art. It's you're trying to think about what meaning you need to represent to someone that can't perceive this image, and also we're in an academic context. So if the test question is name this Greek god, it's really hard to write the alt tag that doesn't say this is Apollo. So I'm not giving you the simple answer either, but I am highlighting that that's a challenge in our particular application. The other thing I'll pass along, so that's something to consider. The other thing I'll pass along is that if you use a direct decorative image, most users of alternative technologies would prefer you leave that blank so that it doesn't get read out. So if you have a fancy serif or decorative image on your web page, it's better to not have an alt tag at all than say interesting squiggle or simple hash mark if it's only there for decoration. But again, in our academic context, in the context of adding content to the CK and Sakai, there's very little decorative content being added by end users. And to that end, we are exploring ways to make alt tags mandatory for all text added to Sakai. It isn't the default because it's not the default CK editor, and there are exceptions, but we're exploring ways to present that as an option to institutions if they want to, because it would be one way to improve the content added to Sakai. And I'm behind my slides here. Okay. Having semantically helpful elements. So putting structure in the tags you add. So if you have a bunch of content that is effectively a list, then there are list elements in that toolbar at the top of the CK editor for ordered lists, 1, 2, 3, 4, A, B, C, D, and unordered lists, so bullets. Better to make those a list and to tag them as such than to do things like put an asterisk in front of everything or a dash, because assistive technology can then make meaning of that and present to the user depending on their own settings. But generally, you're entering into a list. There are a dozen items, first item, second item, third. That gives the person who's having to perceive the list through those means some way to know what's there, what's coming, what context they're in. And additionally, they'll have an interface and the various tools to do things like jump to the start, jump to the end, jump to the middle. And that makes a big difference when you have to access things like very long lists through an otherwise linear fashion. Same goes with using paragraphs versus just hard returns in your typewriter style keyboard import. And using those inline styles for there's a block quote item, there's a citation item, there's a way to tag computer code, a way to alert that a item is pre-formatted text. When you do those things, if you use the items in the CK editor menu to identify things like block quotes, quotations, then you're giving this technology that much more context and information to present to the person trying to perceive it that may not be able to visually see an indented quotation, for example. Color and position. Do not use color or spatial position to convey information. So if the changes are all in red, then someone who's colorblind or someone who otherwise has poor visual capacity can't see all the changes because it's only presented in red. If you can add something else beyond color, in some situations layout is the way to do it. Others, bold or italics might do it. Strike through is a pretty useful way as well. So but color alone is not a good idea for trying to convey information. So if you are trying to convey information through color, that's not wrong. But if you could also add another signifier of that information, that would be helpful for people to perceive it. Additionally, color contrast. Color contrast is important. We've asked the CK editor community to investigate technically distinguishing the contrast of a foreground and background color, but I know many people have had experience where a low color contrast makes things hard to read in low light or in small context. I think this is an issue for people with assistive technologies and even the aging population. So color contrast is important as well, and there are actual measures for that. Use of tables. It's important to give the structure to a table. You can sense I'm hurrying a bit here to make sure that we match our promised timeline. Having a header defined in that table is important, which is an option inside CK editor. You can also add a summary to a table in the CK editor by going into the table properties. And you should almost never use a table for layout. So if you need something in a column layout or a grid of some sort, there are ways to, within the standards like WCAG, use a table for layout and identify as such. But I would call those advanced techniques and also techniques that are difficult to do through a CK editor and difficult to do without full control of the HTML beneath it. So my general recommendation is to not use a table for laying things out. Try use lists. Try and use other features that may be present for aligning and such, but avoid a table for layout. And that's largely because having something in a dialog for tabular data, so knowing what row it's in, knowing what column it's in, is burdensome, confusing for someone that's trying to interface with all that information, was ultimately just a way to indent something, to align something. In the CK editor, there's some options to show blocks, which will allow you to see how things are being broken up, like into lists, into different divisions on the page. You can also do that by going to view source if you understand HTML. I know it's not, most people don't need to know HTML, let alone have much knowledge of it, but if you do it, that's a simple way to check to make sure those structural elements are in there. The other thing I'll caution against is the fmath formula creation tool that is in Sakai is unfortunately not accessible. Math on the web is one of those kind of cutting edge challenges in accessibility, or at least math formulas. But there are better practices. Coming into Sakai 11 is a plugin called MathJax, which may be available to other means, which puts math markup in a layout that's not just a simple image, maybe with an alt tag, but actually inspectable. Someone can work through a math formula in item by item, and additionally, it's very high fidelity. It's using actual fonts, not a picture, so someone with low vision, but nonetheless vision, can zoom into it effectively forever to the extent of their display and see nice, rich formulas and not have to and not be in a scenario where you're zooming on an image, and the more they zoom, the more pixelated it becomes. So if you can avoid fmath, that would be ideal, but not everyone has access to that coming plugin, and available if you know how, MathJax. Mentioned I'd highlight some tools for reviewing your content. I like the Firefox FAE accessibility extension, which gives you a report on accessibility. Chrome has one built in as well. They also have the Wave toolbar, which is a recent development. Firefox has the Fangs screen reader emulator, so that will, once you run that on the page, give you a text block that will describe in text what would likely be heard by a screen reader. So you'll hear the structural elements, you'll hear the item labels, the alt tags laid out. That's useful because, say, an example that our sister project, Sakai OAE, discovered is they had a dialogue where you'd see someone's picture and their name beside it. And trying to be as accessible as possible, when they displayed someone's picture, they put the alt tag of that person's name, set the alt tag of that person's name. In practice, what meant was every time a screen reader came by that, they would go through the picture and hear Matt Clare, and then beside that would be the person's name, Matt Clare. So this was redundant information every single time someone's picture approved, added with the intent to make it more accessible. Things like the Fangs screen reader lets you see that that's the scenario you're creating, so that's useful there. You got to see a demo of Chromebox, and also Chrome's developer tools includes an accessibility audit. Mentioned the MVA screen reader, and our working group has a really big list of tools, which includes a short list at the top of the key tools for reviewing accessible content. So I want to highlight what you can do, which is consider these things in the core principle when you add content. Use things like headings and lists as they were intended, and consider how someone who isn't well-sighted might read that information, or how someone colorblind might be missing some meaning when you create it. I want to pause there for relative questions and check in on my my colleagues to see if Jeff has joined us, for example.
Yeah, we definitely have Jeff and Kyle on the line, so you don't have to worry. Yeah.
Great.
Yeah, they're with us, and I just put the link for the Confluence page for the Sakai Accessibility group in the chat there. I also put a link for the enhancement request to make alt tag a requirement when you're embedding an image with the rich text editor. If you guys want to take a look at it and weigh in on that. I think I realize we're just gonna kind of scream through to the end here because we're kind of running out of time. I realize people might have some time constraints, but we'll just go through. There's a couple questions here. I think we can just rip through these real quick, and then we can get to the rest of this presentation. So one is I thought WebAIM said that for images that you should use quotes for decorative images. I don't know if you wanted to and not leave it blank, just have quotes instead. Have you ever heard of that, Matt?
I have, and um, I've heard from different people who've given different advice going either way, and at some points I'm not even clear if they mean a blank alt tag or not, but I've heard that. I honestly don't have enough experience across all of the screen readers to understand what would be a best practice, really. I personally go with leaving it blank as the decorative option, but I don't want to lose sight of in Sakai, there's likely no decorative items that someone adding content would be doing. Sorry for a less than ideal answer.
Well, that's okay. It's a good answer. There's a question here about where to download a copy of all these good accessibility practices. But as you pointed out, you can I think you can get a lot of these from the accessibility working group page, and it's also in the Sakai help as well. So there are some good resources out there that go more into. I know for a fact that you guys have. The best practices for using the rich text editor go more into detail than what we're doing here, and have some screenshots to make, for examples. I'll also pass along. There's some for our ANI clients. I'll pass this along later, but we've got some knowledge-based articles for that basically are same content that you can find on the Confluence page here for the Accessibility Working Group. And finally, the last question says, if we should not use tables for layouts, how should we control layout?
So if you have full control over your web page, you can do floats and alignments and use your div blocks and responsive ways and JavaScript and all of that, but that's likely not the case adding content to Sakai. So that's a challenge. If you want to use a table for layout, the best practice for that is to set the ARIA role to presentation, which is something that Lessons will be doing in the next version of Lessons for its use. But depending on, there's no way to do it in Cicada. You have to do it in the source, and that can be tricky to do. But if someone wants to whoever asked that question wants to learn more about ARIA roles and presentation, and they're welcome to contact me through any means. Morpheus is, of course, the project to remove the iframe, that central content frame, inside of Sakai. It's being done on top of a framework called Bootstrap, which is a proven and elsewhere used framework for making what we call responsive design, so a website that will respond to the different screen resolutions and contexts it finds itself in, a very robust way of framework. It's what powers my own personal website, and that will mean that Sakai will no longer rely on the iframe in the middle and will no longer have a desktop version and a mobile version. So if someone were to visit the future version of Sakai on a mobile phone, they'll get a layout that's more narrow, more vertical, and that's going to be used for that smaller screen size. And if they have a bigger screen, if they have a tablet or a desktop, they'll get a layout designed for that larger screen size and space. So not dedicated interfaces for certain devices, but a website that responds to the dimensions and the context it finds itself in. Having the iframe in Sakai has been a diminishing, actually, accessibility challenge, but nonetheless a challenge, and not a common or best practice. Having all of Sakai in one web page makes it more consistent with other web pages that anyone would find, and thus a predictable layout. The focus on mobile, having mobile being a equal or just as valued platform as desktop, is great for people using assistive software, because a lot of individuals use something like an iPad as their assistive device, and that's the only technology they use. Having that mobile interface for their particular situation is great for that kind of person because they can Zoom, they can use an interface that may not have to be relying on so many fine motor elements to work through. And so that specifically zooming is important because when we build for something like the iPad or any other tablet or whatever that allows for zooming, specifically in the WCHU level AA, you must have a site that can be understood and functional at 200% zoom, and something like Morpheus will make that the case across the whole tool.
Jeff and Kyle, if you want to step up here and say a few words about the Gradebook Enhancement Project. Good to have you.
Yeah, sure thing. Thanks for having us. Yeah, we'll say a few and we'll keep it brief. So I'll just say, the Gradebook Enhancements Project, it's a Sakai community project, and specifically it's a collaboration between NYU, Notre Dame, ANI, and Longsight. It's based on the current Sakai Gradebook. If you want to learn more about the project in general, you can just Google Sakai Gradebook Enhancements, and you'll find all the videos. But I will also just paste into the chat rather, or maybe I won't. I can't seem to do it, but maybe Kyle can.
Yeah, and if you want to send it to me too, yeah, I can do it. Yeah.
Sure thing. But if you just Google Sakai Gradebook Enhancements, you'll find plenty of videos on that, and specifically information about accessibility. But as you can see on this first screen, we provide the ability to enter via a spreadsheet interface, which is a pretty fundamental change in the design. So we wanted to make sure that we were thinking about accessibility from the start. So if we go to the next slide. Our project scope is very tight, so it was introducing the spreadsheet entry capability, consolidating and simplifying the import-export capabilities, and then finally, our third point was just, again, keeping accessibility in mind, accessibility and usability, using best practices and doing testing as we develop this. So we're working with two great developers, Steve Swinsberg, who's been in the Sakai community for some time, and his company Flying Kite, as well as Peyton Giles. But in addition, we also brought in an external accessibility and usability vendor to advise us from the very start. Putting in the spreadsheet entry specifically, with that table was something we were concerned with. So they worked with us on that. And then I'll turn it over to Kyle for some specifics.
Great, thank you. Okay, so if we go to the next slide here. Okay, so I'm just going to talk very briefly about some of the accessibility efforts with the Gradebook project. So the first thing we have here is keyboard navigability. So one of the main goals with accessibility is to try to make the entire interface of the keyboard navigable. So this means offering intuitive navigation around the tool, and then, of course, into and around the spreadsheet itself, since that's dominating so much of the interface. And that also means having keyboard accessible paths for every action you can take. So, for example, cells can be quickly navigated with the arrow and tab keys, and that has an added benefit of providing some existing conventions and familiarity for users. They can then use the spreadsheet the same way they would with Google Spreadsheets or Excel, Apple Numbers, things like that. It means that editing can be invoked within the spreadsheet by either clicking the return key or entering any sort of numeric key to sort of move your way through the spreadsheet. Contextual menus for the spreadsheet can be tabbed to and opened via the keyboard, and certain actions like drag and drop reordering can also be actioned via menu items, such as having a move column left or move column right within the interface. We also have standard markup. So one of the challenges is being able to provide the best possible experience for screen reader users. So we intend to achieve this by using standard markup wherever possible. So the spreadsheet, therefore, is contained within a single table so that we can offer context within the table via column and row headers as users try to navigate through that. So while the interface will offer fixed headers and columns as you scroll through your spreadsheet, because you might have a number of different items and want to be able to move through those, the actual table itself will always remain intact and offer steady context as the user navigates from cell to cell. And then lastly, we will be using best practice ARIA attributes for any of the dynamic content that happens within the gradebook. So this includes different menus, dialog windows, notifications, and the actual editable cells. So that's just a very brief overview of the accessibility enhancements for the gradebook. As Jeff was mentioning, there are a number of different videos and information available on the Sakai project wiki page for the gradebook that has more information on this.
Yeah, absolutely, and thank you, Jim, for pasting that into the chat. So there is at least one video there of a presentation where both our developers speak a little more in depth about accessibility and how they are developing this.
Great. Well, that's the extent of everything I wanted to share, and thanks to Jeff and Kyle, especially Kyle created the logo way back at the first slide there. And I wanted to see if there are any other questions, anything else I could answer, or things I could direct people towards.
So I have a question about the Gradebook project. I've seen a few presentations regarding it, and I'm excited about it. In one webinar I saw, I did notice that there are some very tiny icons in it. Is there any consideration of putting in text in lieu of some of these icons?
Yeah, absolutely. So we're still in development. I think the very first presentation we did on this was essentially a clickable wireframe with some smaller text. The text is getting bigger as now we're what you saw in the sort of the screenshot in the slide presentation is the actual gradebook as it is now, but we're doing sort of another round, especially when we think about mobile, of being able to make icons and text bigger, and also to behave differently on a mobile device. So I mean, there are these small sort of drop downs in the cell, being able to make on a tablet to make those larger to click. So we're going to do as we do more user testing, we're going to address those types of concerns, and so we're doing another round with this external vendor and to address those.
Thanks, Jeff. Okay, I think that was the last question, so I think we can wrap things up. Okay, so I want to thank Matt and Jeff and Kyle for the presentation today. Thank you guys very much.
Thank you. Thanks for the time.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, and I want to thank everyone for attending too. I hope everyone has a good day. Okay, bye now, everyone.